we came to be where we're at.
Okay, great. So, so I'm going to just kind of talk to Melissa, who I adore you as well, but also families out there, because a lot of you are in a place where you don't know what to do. And it could be as an adult, and you just need, you need help with recovery. You're engaging in substances more than you should. But I'm going to speak as a parent. And it's just the most terrifying thing in the world, and some of you can really relate, when your son or daughter comes to you and they are in trouble, or you just realize they're in trouble. Maybe they have been thinking about ending their life. Maybe you find some things in their backpack or in their room that shouldn't be there. Maybe you get alerted to, by a friend's mom, that something is up. It's terrifying. It's just terrifying. And the reason why I'm here is because I just want you guys to know that there's hope. There's hope and there's help. And that's the big thing. There's a lot of stigma around mental health issues. There's a lot of stigma around substance abuse. But it is so widespread that it shouldn't be anymore. The CDC came out with some stats last month. They published an article, and we're talking about just the spike in mental health struggles, in substance use, as well as suicidal ideation among adults, but also youth. It's really high among youth. And I think so I'm always a glass half full person. I'm always looking for something good out of it. I think one good thing out of COVID is that it brings the mental health issue to light.
I agree with you. I
Right?
think that's what I've been seeing, well, especially with adolescents and their families, but adults as well. But yeah, you're forced to talk about it.
You're forced to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think when we're forced to talk about it, and it's in the news, it's on it's on your Facebook feed. It's people are talking about it a little bit more, and I think that makes people feel more comfortable to talk about it.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I think the substance use too. I think now parents are forced to take a look at what their kids are actually doing. A lot of them are home with them now. We kind of talked about that last week. It's just now, if they were ignoring it, they can't any longer. And if they had no idea, now they have an idea. And so we're getting a lot of phone calls from families of adolescents right now. And I think, as well as the mental health and the suicidal ideation, substance use is definitely relevant, but when you get to the bottom of it, there's something underlying, right?
Right.
And so I love the fact that you're willing to come on here and talk about what that looked like for your family, because that's not something that people want to talk about. And that's something we shy away from. There is a stigma, and there is the idea, like, no one wants to talk about mental health, suicidal ideation, or any of that. Let's just move on and get better. And you can't get better if you're not talking about it.
You can't get better. And I think the other thing is that I think parents are so afraid of what would that look like if I reached out for help. Sometimes it's law enforcement that gets involved, and that's terrifying. Sometimes it's putting your child on a hold, on a mental health hold. That's terrifying. Sometimes it's reaching out to an outpatient program like the Way Out. Sometimes it's an inpatient program. Those are all terrifying. And they're terrifying from, a lot of times with parents, it's terrifying of how is that going to impact their lives? Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, a lot of times what we're dealing with is life and death. So we are not, so it's important to know when to take those steps. I know for us, coming to actually, for our younger son, it was getting help for because he was struggling with some mental health issues. And he ended up going on a voluntary hold. So he's at the behavioral health unit at Henry Mayo Hospital. That was terrifying to my husband and I, but that night, it's very cool. That was his first AA meeting. So AA brought a meeting to the behavioral health unit. It was also a place where he was able to see a psychiatrist. If any of you parents out there have tried to get an appointment for yourself or for your youth with a psychiatrist, it's really hard to do, and you can wait months for it. So a place like that, they get you to see a psychiatrist very quickly. And they also offer help, like what happens when you leave here, and that's how we ended up with you guys.
And I think it's important too, what you said right before that is, what does that look like? You know, people are scared of what that might look like for their life if they do it. And I would say to them, what will it look like if you don't? Because I know personally your story and your son, but not just him. There's a lot of people who, if they had not had the opportunity to get the help, potentially could have killed themselves.
Yes.
And so that's, for me, even more scary than the idea of reaching out and asking for help. Uncertainty is going to be there regardless, but at least getting like the 5150 or putting a voluntary hold, all those things are scary. And all of those things are unknown and uncertain at the time, but not doing anything, you might just walk in and find that there is no life to move forward with. And so I think it's amazing that you offer that, you know, and I'll get into that later when I think about what you do for the recovery community as a whole, but to offer that and to say, like, it's okay to do this. And that's one of the most important things I think I've heard you say in this whole time I've known you, is that you're always open with your story and with your family's story. And I think that's what we need more of. We need more people to know that you're not alone. There are other families going through it. And as we move forward in this discussion, I definitely want to touch base on what that looks like for them. But I know you guys started with The Way Out. In fact, one of the very first people we had as a participant. And so what was that like? How did that dynamic go for your family?
Well, you know, so my husband and I showed up with our son, and we thought, well, we're just here to get him better. You know, we're just here
I love
to help,
that.
right? And we didn't realize, and one of the first things that we were told is, you guys are also in recovery. And we said, well, actually, we decided, we're not going to have any alcohol in the house. We're definitely it was like, no. Way beyond that. You guys are in recovery because it's always a family disease, whether you're dealing with, self-harm or substances or mental health issues. It's a family disease, and everyone is affected. So everyone in that group then, in that family, is in their own recovery,
right,
and has their own recovery process. That was an eye-opener for me, and I didn't get that for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's so important.
I think it's so funny, too, because we tell families when they come in, whether it's parents or significant others, or we've even had adult children as the family member, that one of our main goals is for them to be okay regardless of whether or not their loved one is okay, right? Regardless of whether they stay sober or not. Everybody's working their own self-care and their own program, and it's so hard for the family to hear that, because it's like, well, when I come in, I'm obviously coming in to support you, right? And so I've talked to a lot of families, especially parents, who are like, well, I'm here to fix them or to make it better, or whatever. And when I say, I actually just said this to the mother of an adolescent, what are you doing for you? And she's like, what do you mean? And I remember with you, it was just like that. It's, we're so busy taking care of our families, and we're so busy focusing on, obviously, the individual who needs the attention, that we lack the self-care, and we even lack the idea of what that looks like, because we're so busy loving and taking care of our family. And I mean, you and your family are an amazing example of what can happen in this program and where you start and where you're at now. But I mean, for your own individual journey, and I know for your husband's individual journey, that looks so different than I think what you came in with.
Yes.
And so it's interesting. You identified your own relationship with alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the first thing was, we decided to quit, and we're not going to drink. And of course, there's guilt associated, because you're thinking, what have we modeled for our kids? We've modeled, and so many people can drink normally. Right? Mm-hmm. They can have a glass of wine at dinner. Right. They can use it as a celebratory glass of champagne at a wedding. They can do that kind of thing. We discovered in this journey that we cannot, and that's okay. Yeah. I think it's just identifying that. But I think as far as the whole self-care and your own recovery, to me, that sounded like the most selfish thing I'd ever heard.
Right.
And I know that moms and dads can relate that you would die for your kid. You would, absolutely, without question, you would kill for them. You would do whatever for them. But if you are not healthy, if you're not good yourself, you can't help anybody else. And there are so many parents that I see that get they get so sick because they are trying to help their children. They are trying to run their kids' recovery, and they can't.
Yeah.
And
that's scary, I'm sure.
Yeah, and they can end up in the hospital and have ended up in the hospital. So it's kind of like, and it sounds cliche, but it's so true. When you're on an airplane and you've got a kid with you, you got to put on your own oxygen mask first.
Right.
Because if you don't, you're going to pass out before you wrangle that 4-year-old and get a mask on them.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. So you really have to look at self-care as not as selfish, but it is the most selfless thing you can do for your family is to get healthy yourself. And you're also then changing that environment in your house.
Right.
If you get healthier, then it changes the dynamic.
And I think that's what people don't realize is that that's when you become okay, whether they're okay, once you've started to do the change for yourself. And it's funny because even as the other side of it, like I am the addict in my family with, a 15-year-old daughter, and I'm in recovery. And it's funny because people ask me, like, well, it's so nice that, you have your family, and it is. But she's not first. And I know, like you said, it sounds so awful, but I can say that out loud today because the truth is I cannot be a mother or a wife if I'm not sober.
Right.
And so selfishly and selflessly, I have to put myself first and that took me a while because there is shame and guilt associated with doing things for myself because for so long I was only worried about me. But it's the same thing. Like, I have to be okay for her. And I'm not okay if I'm not sober. And if I'm not working on my sobriety, I don't stay sober. So it all goes back to, like, what you need to do for you so you can be there because it is a family disease. And I love talking to you because you have that aspect of it, like that loved one. Like, what do the loved ones need to do? Whenever they ask me that, it's like, yes, of course, love and boundaries and support, but you have to take care of yourself.
You have to.
Because by the time you make it to us, you're so ran dry and emotionally depleted and mentally depleted, and you usually by the time they get to us they're desperate.
Yes.
And they've tried everything else. I mean, I wish I could say we're that first call they find out and people call us right away and we live in this world of like everything's perfect after that, but there's not. I mean, sometimes relapse is a part of that story, but most of the time, by the time families make it to us, they're struggling.
Yes.
And something significant has happened, and that's why they're calling us. And so I love to hear the family aspect of it because it helps me as the recovering person to remember why I continue to do what I'm doing, because it is a family disease and my choices affect my loved ones. Mm-hmm. And so I like to hear that from you and like how it affects you and what you're doing and what you do to stay sane. What did you do in that early time frame when your son was in treatment and everything was new and you weren't sure if he was sober and gonna stay sober? What did that look like for you?
So that was the hardest time in my life. I didn't, and the hard part too is I didn't actively think about killing myself, but I didn't want to live because it hurt too much. It was too hard. And getting through each moment was terrifying. So, but I knew even if I didn't want to be there, that both my kids needed me, even though they were young adults, they still needed me. My husband needed me. I couldn't abandon him to go through this by himself. So I did, we would go for a walk. The biggest thing is I would find myself getting up earlier and earlier every day and just spend time in prayer, and that became my refuge. And it's interesting because I've always had faith. I've been very blessed in that regard, and my parents, instilling that in me, but I don't think I really knew what faith was until, you're faced with potentially losing one of your kids. Yeah. That is when you have to go and you have no control. The control is the crazy part. Yeah. And that is when you have to ask yourself, do this faith I've been living my whole life, is it real? Right. Is God real? Right. Can I trust him? And that's the part that is the scariest, but that is how I got through every moment of every day. And then, and you guys knowing we weren't alone, my son was able to call you, which was incredible. Yeah. And you were at the top of his, I feel like I'm going to use list. Yeah. Right? Where he's like, okay, talk me down from this. And that support is so important, because as parents, we can't do it on our own. We don't know what the heck we're doing.
Yeah.
Right? We don't know
Yeah.
what we're doing. And so to have people in your corner, and just, the good thing about us out here in Santa Clarita, we have a really strong recovery community. I just didn't
Absolutely.
know it.
Absolutely. I think a
just
lot of
didn't
people don't know it.
Right. But there's a lot of help. There's a lot of help. And you just have to get past, the stigma. And that's why it takes something big happening.
Right.
Because
That desperation.
It's desperation.
Yeah.
But that big thing happening could be the very thing that stops that road, stops whether it's a road of very more serious addiction, maybe it's a road to suicide.
Right.
Whatever it is, that big event, which is the worst thing you can ever imagine in your life, can often turn into the thing that saved your life.
And I think it's important to know that there is such an emotional connection with families, and that's why we suggest you talk to somebody else. Because I know multiple times of talking to your son, it's like, I know you can't go to your parents, and not because he can't go to you because you won't understand, but because that emotional connection is so heightened, and everybody's like walking on eggshells and worried about protecting his recovery, that it's hard to be transparent with your loved one. Right? Because if I say to, another recovering person or my counselor, like, hey, it's been really tough, I'm thinking about using, then we go, yeah, me too, and we can talk through that. But if you say that to your loved one who's already trying to do everything to make sure that you're okay, they don't necessarily understand what you mean by that. It's a fleeting thought maybe, or, and it's nice. I mean, I have a personal relationship with him, and I still continue to maintain a personal relationship with him. But walking through that and watching him walk through his own journey and being part of that has been amazing for my life too, because it's amazing to see someone's light come on. When they're just not sure if they want to live, not sure if they want to get sober, not sure what that even looks like. And then to see them transition, because he did get involved in recovery community and he did do what was suggested of him. And I think at about 2 years sober is when it came into play with your older son, correct?
Yes. And I think at that point, and the thing is too, and we have families at A Light of Hope, and we'll talk about that too, but where there are siblings involved. And with the siblings, you think we're trying our best to make sure we keep things going with the brother or the sister, but quite often so much of your energy and your time and your emotion is spent on the kid that's in trouble, that sibling is feeling kind of adrift. And it's, so with our other son, he, I think, was actually watching our recovery that made him want recovery.
Right, lead by example.
Which is amazing, and that's not why we did it at all.
Yeah.
We did it because we were drowning, and we needed to take care of ourselves so we could be around for them. But that was amazing.
Yeah.
That happened too, and I and I think sometimes, whether it's regarding recovery or anything else, I think when you have something so crazy hard and painful in your life, to see that there's a purpose for it, it makes it worth it. If you don't use it, if you don't use that pain, it's just wasted pain.
Right.
It's wasted pain. So if you can look and when you're in a place where you're like, oh, but this is still so hard in different ways, you can look back and go, but if this hadn't happened,
right,
look at all the things that wouldn't have happened.
Exactly.
If this hadn't happened, we would potentially be 3 years into, trying to live with the fact that, our son wasn't alive anymore. I mean, there are so many things, but you have to remind yourself and each other. I often say that, we have to remind ourselves, it's sometimes there's a saying I love, that if there are times when your faith isn't strong enough, you need to stand on somebody else's.
Right.
And I think that's where, whatever community you find yourself in, whether that's AA or Al-Anon or an outpatient group, to transition to one of those other community groups, or whether it's your church group or just your neighborhood, whatever it is, you need to remind each other, look, remember how bad this was, and look at the good things that have come out of it.
Right.
If you don't, we go crazy. You go crazy.
Well, and I think it's easy to forget. if you're not talking about it, right? It's easy a month from now to go, was it really that bad? But if you're talking about it, then you can remember, yes, it really was.
It really was.
And one of the interesting things that I love about the Way Out and working for the Way Out is that although we support 12 steps, AA, NA, CA, all the A's, although we support that, and that's personally what I do for my own recovery, that's not the only way. Right. And we are open to suggesting any and everything that's community support based. So what might look, and your family is an amazing example of that, because you have one son who got very involved in A Light of Hope, and you have another son who got very involved in 12-step, and then you and your family are very involved in parent groups. And so, I mean, you can find support groups for anything. There are the 12 steps, and there's Smart Recovery, and there's Light of Hope, who I do want to get into that, because we do refer our young adults and our adolescents to go there, because it is a community support group here in Santa Clarita that focuses on young individuals who feel like they don't have an outlet, because a lot of them come back and go, yeah, but AA, and here I am, one of them, is a lot of older people. And there are young groups, but
some are older than you.
Yeah, older than me.
I know.
Wow, I don't know.
It's crazy.
I mean, when my adolescents come back and they're like, oh, it's all old people, I'm like, like me, and so we laugh about that because it's just funny. I mean, there are young people in AA, and don't get me wrong, there are young groups and youth groups, but I love that A Light of Hope has stepped into Santa Clarita and given them a place where they feel safe, and they call it home. I mean, I have a lot of adolescents I talk to who go, oh, that's my spot, and I love that. But I love that each family member can find their own space, and each individual finds their own recovery. I know people who do Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christian-based, recovery program, and I know people who have found it through all kinds of different community support groups. And that's something I do want to transition into is IOP is amazing. Residential treatment is amazing. Detox, if you need it, amazing. And you can go from one to the next, right? You can start at a detox, go to an inpatient, step down to an IOP, but what's after that? I talk to a lot of people who are completing our program who the whole time they've been there, I've been suggesting to find a community support group, which is what we push for, that don't know where they're going after that, because IOP is amazing temporarily, and you gain the education, you gain insight, and you gain, relapse prevention plan and tools, but what do you do after that? Then you just go into nothing, and then you come back. And so it's really, really important. I want everyone to hear me, whether you're in an IOP or not. If you are struggling with the disease of addiction, find something. Find a community support group. Find like-minded people, because without that, you still feel so alone. You cannot do it alone. Asking for help is absolutely the first step, and that's not just a thing we say. It's the truth. Once you reach out and realize there are other people that are going through the exact same thing you're going through, you don't feel so alone, and it takes some of that power away from the disease, and so I know that Light of Hope has been a big impact in your life and your family's life. What does that look like for you guys?
So when our younger son found A Light of Hope, and again, it was through promptings from you saying, you got to have someplace else to transition to. And so he found A Light of Hope, and he told us, he said, they have a parent group. And I think part of it was he had heard from the president of that organization that met with him, and is amazing, that it would be helpful, but also I think it's a way of getting my parents out of my recovery. Right. Because we were at that time, I think, just, watching him all the time.
I love that, though. That's the truth.
It is totally the truth. It is totally the truth. Yeah. And we felt like we needed to at some point, but we also needed to back off and take care of ourselves a little bit. But A Light of Hope is, it's a nonprofit organization. Or tell me if I'm running out of time. We can. But it was started actually over 12 years ago by Tim and Susan Traurig. And I remember I ran into Susan, who was working at my chiropractor many years ago, and just when they were starting this. And I remember looking at the brochure and thinking, oh, those poor people. Those poor people that need this. Right. And I just obviously had no idea that we would end up being there, and it would just be such a part of saving our lives. Right. But they started it because they're very open about their own story. Their 2 out of 3 daughters struggled with addiction badly, and they would go to rehab and come back and then end up in the same peer group. So A Light of Hope is based on what we call an APG model, and it's an alternative peer group. And what that means is, you've got your kids' friends are not really their friends. One of the dads in our group
Right.
coined the term, it's an associate. Because a friend actually cares about your well-being. The kids that your child is hanging out with and doing drugs with them is not interested in your child's well-being. So the associate. So this gives them a place to be, a community.
Yeah.
We all need that. And then there's the parent group. I have a very dear friend who's battling cancer right now, and she's got healthcare friends who understand what cancer is. She has dear friends and family who can look it up and
Yeah.
see what cancer is and what it does. But she's in a support group for other people who've gone through it, because only somebody who has gone through it can understand what it actually is. And it's the same way with, with the youth that is struggling with, maybe they're not at substances yet. Maybe they're just struggling with anxiety and depression.
Right.
And we've got kids like that who've never picked up a drug or a drink yet. That's the time to address it, because eventually they're going to find something that feels good and something that makes that depression stop for a little bit, that anxiety to turn off for a little bit. And then you're going down a whole different road. Maybe it's self-harm. And then those are, these are the kids that, they're cool because they're doing this stuff. But at some point, the other kids are like, wait, this is a little bit farther than I'm going.
Right.
Right. So they need a group of people that understand them and understand what they're struggling with. Just like any other group.
Yeah.
Nobody gets it unless you've been there.
And that's what I love about all the community support groups, but especially Light of Hope, because it's not impossible, but it's really hard for a 15 or 16-year-old to identify currently with, a 40-year-old. And you can find it, and you can say, oh, I was there when I was 16, and I went through the same thing, and that's great, and lead by example. But to find another person similar to your story, closer to your age, especially at that age,
Right.
it's like, oh, other kids my age are doing this. They're getting sober. Because one of the biggest misunderstandings I think that's out there is everybody's getting loaded. And the truth is no, everybody is getting loaded, because we tend to associate with people who are doing what we're doing. So if I'm getting high, then yes, everybody's getting high, because everybody I choose to hang out with is getting high. I'm not going to personally hang out with a bunch of sober people when I'm high. But if you're sober and you look for other people who are sober, you'll find that. It doesn't matter how old you are. You will find that group of people who are doing what you're doing, because we flock to what we know, right? And so when I hear kids tell me like, well, everybody's getting high, and it's like, yeah, everybody because you've built up relationships with people who are using. But you can also find people, especially here in Santa Clarita. I think we are so blessed to have a recovery community for all ages. For everybody and for everything. You can find any kind of recovery out here, especially right now with Zoom and with online. Last week I was in a meeting in the San Fernando Valley on Zoom, and I'm like, oh, well, here's all these new people. So, the world is open to us. But with Light of Hope, what I like about what's happening is it also is a place, yes, they talk about the anxiety and the substance, but they also have things going on, right? Like on the weekend that's not solely focused on what's wrong.
Right.
And what's going on, right? It's a place like where they can do something fun together. Is that right?
And so it's a little bit off course, right now because of COVID, as everything else is in our lives. But it's set up so that on Saturdays, typically, there's an activity, whether it's hiking together, and then back when we used to be able to eat in restaurants, might be lunch afterwards,
Right.
or it might be bowling, or it's going down to Dockweiler Beach and having a bonfire, or neon frisbee golf in the park. Just fun things to hang out together, because the groups that they go to, which is Tuesdays and Thursday nights from 7 to 8:30, and they are meeting in person. They are back meeting in person.
That's amazing.
Which is amazing, and because it is an essential service with mental health. But that's a support group. That's a little bit of therapy time. So but what's really important is to build the relationships and have that group be the group that you're going to call when you have your own list of who am I going to call when I'm struggling?
Right.
Who am I going to call when I feel like using?
Right.
Who am I going to call when I feel like hurting myself? And
Right.
that's really important. So to build that relationship, we have these outings. So hopefully we can get back to that soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm absolutely hoping that for all community support groups, but for like the Way Out and for Light of Hope, I think it's so important because that's something they get to enjoy time together doing something fun.
Yes.
Sober, because a lot of people are under the misconception like it's so boring to be sober. So when I would watch you, or like even when your son was participating in activities, it's like, oh my god, we had so much fun. And I was like, sober, right? You know, and you get to experience it sober. We used to do potlucks at the Way Out. Right now we're in the same position where we're trying to figure out safety first and then what's next. But I mean, it was a time where people said, I've never played a game before, ever. Or I've never played sober, and we're doing sober board game day, you know? And it's like, I love to see that in our community, like to see people experiencing sobriety and all that it has to offer and all the fun stuff. It's also interesting to have you here like this because I did meet you when you first came in, when your family first came in. I have worked with both of your children, but it's more than that. Like, you are a person, I believe the recovery world is so blessed to have you and your family be part of it. I really do. You are a person that when a parent calls me or a family member or a loved one and I say, I know it's difficult, why don't you reach out to this person? You've always made yourself readily available to other people, even people in recovery. You didn't just limit yourself to like, oh, give my number to the families. It's like you've always been there if someone, you and both your sons and your husband have always made yourself available to people in recovery. You know, I know that that everybody takes their own journey, but to watch your whole family take this journey together and like to be part of that from the beginning has been so amazing. You have grown so much in the years that I've known you, but to watch it and to see you give back, you know, it's like a lot of people, their family, I don't want to say gets okay, but their family gets to a place where everybody's sober and everybody's doing well, and we kind of forget about everybody else out there. I've seen a lot of times where families are like, well, my kids are okay now, so that's good. And what you've done with that is, so what can I do for other people? And it's so interesting because both your sons are still sober, correct?
They are.
And that's less on your mind today, right? If they're picking up.
It's less for sure, and but I know that it's one day at a time.
Yeah.
And you know, sobriety is only one piece of it because,
Right.
you know, there are people that are sober and have no recovery. And if you have no
Right.
recovery, then you're just a mess. And there's a term called dry drunk, which is a real thing.
Yeah.
And not even just in regards to addiction, it's in regards to anything else. If you have no tools, then you're a nightmare. And I think I look at, you know, a couple things. Is one, finding purpose in the pain, which is part of why I do it. The other thing is, and I know with AA, they talk about service and doing things for other people. There are studies, you know, psychological studies that show that if you're depressed, the best thing you can do is to do something for somebody else. So, you know, part of it is for yourself. It sounds we're so selfish
Here we go
and
again.
wonderful, but it's really selfish because it makes you feel better about
Right.
yourself, about your situation, if it actually helps somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it too, and that's part of the recovery model. The other thing too for parents who are struggling with this is your kids are going to learn, you know, if you get them involved in some kind of recovery, whatever that looks like for you, they're going to be better adults. They're going to be healthier adults. They're going to be able to deal with other things. I know for me, I use recovery tools for, you know, that I've learned at a Light of Hope and
Right.
the Way Out, but for work situations. Aside from just, you know, anything else, communication, any other relationships.
Yeah.
So those tools are really important. So I think if we have kids, you know, and I'm talking kids, for example, Light of Hope is 14 to 26. So when I talk about kids, I'm not talking about, I'm probably using the term a little too broadly, but this next generation needs to know how to deal with stuff because a lot of us as adults haven't modeled it very well.
Yeah, no,
You know?
100% agreed.
Yeah.
I mean, at least for me and my family, I modeled up until my daughter was 8, you know, instability. moving uncertainty. My daughter didn't know what mom was coming home. And so even though I got sober when she was 8, I have to go back and think about what did I model in those formative years, right? And so I love to have her involved. She does not do drugs or drink or anything, but she knows the recovery community because I jumped in with both feet, and so did her dad. And it's like, okay, so she knows recovery community. She sees young people recovering. She knows I work with kids her age, and so she gets to experience that. And if anything ever happens where she needs somewhere to go, then she's going to know where to go. Mm-hmm. She's going to know that there are other like-minded people, and I'm grateful for that. And so I think it's really important for our kids to know that, no, maybe right now they don't, but to know that there's a place where you can go as a parent and as an adolescent. I think it's important to know that you're not alone. As far as a Light of Hope, you said they also deal with not just substance use, right?
Right, because there are a lot of things that happen. If you've got a kid who's 14, 15, they may not have gotten into that realm yet. So they just may be dealing with anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. So we definitely have youth there that's kind of where it's expanded. Right. So it's not just about addiction. They're not going to show up and just have, mom, they're just a bunch of addicts. That's not the case. Right. And
I think that's important. Right. Because I know there's a lot of self-harm. There's a lot of self-harm. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, youth today, self-harm is, and I've seen it, it's the other coping skill. Okay, I'm not using, or maybe you're using and participating in self-harm, but that's something that needs support. And so I've seen people recover from that or be in the recovery process for that. And I know we have to take a break in a couple seconds, but when we come back, I do want to talk a little bit about how do people reach out and find a Light of Hope? How do they know where to go? How do they know if it's right for their child and their family? And so when we come back, I did want to touch on that a little bit with you.
Great.
Join us this fall for online fun with the Canyon Theater Guild online youth workshops. Super fun classes with acting, singing, dancing, audition tips, script writing, scene study, improv, and putting on real shows created for online performance. Get creative, meet new friends, and most of all, have a blast from the comfort of your own home. Call 661-799-2702 or ctgworkshops@gmail.com or canyontheater.org.
With many auto dealers currently closed, Reeves Complete Auto Center is open to handle service and repairs for your vehicle. With a 2-year, 24,000-mile parts and labor warranty, Dave Reeves and his team have been exceeding their customers' expectations for decades. Reeves Complete Auto Center is here for you while your dealer is closed. On Soledad and Ruther, reevesservice.com. Reeves Complete Auto Center, caring about Santa Clarita and you. Hey there, it's Tori with your hometown station weather. Another day of mostly sunny skies with some clouds hanging around. Highs in the upper 80s, low 90s, overnight lows in the low 60s. For anything and everything Santa Clarita Valley related, go to hometownstation.com or find us on social media at KHTS Radio.
98.1 FM and AM 1220.
I got no excuses.
Hi, if you're just joining us, I'm Melissa Flowers with The Way Out Recovery, and this is The Way Out Recovery Hour. In studio with me today is Kathleen Wood. We've been having an amazing chat over here just about recovery and the family dynamic, and what does it look like after you leave intensive outpatient. And it's just so funny because I enjoy being with you so much that it's time passes so fast when you're talking to someone that you admire and you love and you respect. And so thank you for being in studio if I didn't say that earlier. I do want to talk about a Light of Hope and how people reach out and how do they know if it's right for them. Mm-hmm. And what would you say to that person if they're sitting at home and maybe not even their adolescent, their young adult is struggling? What would you say to that parent or that family member?
Well, first of all, I love you too, and I think you're amazing, and you have been a part of saving our lives. And
Thank you.
I'm not joking about that. So I have my cheat sheet with the address and everything. So A Light of Hope, the best thing to do probably, you can go ahead and look us up online. We're at alightofhopescv.org. You can email us at heal@alightofhopescv.org, or just call, and that is 661-513-HEAL. So that's 513-4325. A lot of times I'll pick up the phone. So I actually do work. I don't think my boss is listening, but I do work generally. but I'm one of the people on rotation that might pick up the phone. So you might get a voicemail, but then you'll get a call back, and just to kind of maybe talk about your situation and see if it is a good fit. The other thing to do would be to join us. The next step would be to join us on a meeting. So either join the parent meeting. We are all, the parent meeting is still on Zoom, and will be probably for a little while, or perhaps to have your youth between ages of 14 and 26 come to a meeting. So that's probably the best way to reach us. We are at 21176 Center Point Parkway, and that is off of Golden Valley behind Sam's Club.
Okay.
So it's pretty easy to find, and I would just tell parents too, is just take a breath and just make a couple phone calls. Melissa's somebody to call. The great thing about Melissa is that if the way out is not a good fit, she'll find some place for you. If you call A Light of Hope and get one of us, we'll talk them through. We'll have some suggestions. So just make a phone call. Just do something, because you sitting there spinning out in your own head is what we do all too often, and you'll do plenty of that anyway, so don't worry about that. There's plenty of time for that. But you need to do something.
Yeah. Now, what about the parent whose adolescent or young adult doesn't want the help, but they need someone to talk to?
Then we have parents who come, and their young adult or adolescent has never come near A Light of Hope, but they've gotten healthy.
Yeah.
Sometimes the parent getting healthy in that storm and that chaos in their house is the catalyst to have the other family members get healthy too.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that happen. But it may not happen that way.
Right.
But at least you find a little bit of peace. I've talked about like the peace bubble. You find a little bubble in the middle of that storm.
Right.
That you have your own peace in the midst of it.
Yeah.
But things don't stay the same. You don't have that peace bubble and things keep going the way they are around you.
Right.
It does change things.
Well, and that's funny, because even at outpatient, when a family member calls, and I've talked about this several times with Bob on the show and otherwise, that a lot of times the people who call us are the family members, right? It's rare that the individual reaches out for themselves, but usually it's a loved one lining it up. And the thing is like I said earlier, we have to be okay whether our loved one is using or not using. And how do you do that, right? And setting healthy boundaries and stepping into that next part of recovery for yourself might just be the beginning of that. And like you said, that doesn't mean automatically now they're going to get sober and life's perfect. But what it does mean is that you have a support group that you're part of. You have like-minded people, because the family needs like-minded people too.
Yep.
You know how many families I've had say, I've carried this all on my own because I don't think this group would understand, and I think, I don't want to tell the parents at the school. And so you need those people, right? You need the people who understand, who you can talk freely with. And so if that's you and you're sitting out there and your loved one, especially at what age is it? 14 to 26?
14 to 26.
If your young one is looking for help or not looking for help, if you need support, reach out. Call A Light of Hope, call The Way Out. Both of our entities would be glad to send you somewhere else if it's not the right fit. But you have to call someone, and you have to start somewhere. And I love that you came in here with me. I love that we get to now have this friendship outside of the recovery that you started with, and to see people grow. And I love your family, and I adore both of your children and you and your husband. And I'm so glad that we are able to work together, in recovery. And again, I truly believe you are a gift to the recovery community and to families as a whole. And we are so lucky in Santa Clarita to have you guys. I've never seen a more dedicated family, that children are in the process of healing and you're still out there just helping other people's families, opening your home, being available for not just the Way Out, but for Light of Hope and for anybody else who I've ever seen reach out to you. So thank you for all that you guys do in our community.
Thank you for saying
And you know, I adore your kids, and they're going to come on here at some point and hopefully talk about their own story. So thank you for being in studio. I'm Melissa Flowers with the Way Out Recovery. Give us a call anytime at 661-296-4444. Thank you.
They don't see it.